In March 2010, thousands of officials waited in compulsory formation at Sosan Stadium in North Korea. Generals, party cadres, and security officials were among them, all grasping one basic fact. They were there to learn what happens when you fail the dear leader. As the people of North Korea perished through famine, the Pyongyang ruling elite sipped cognac and speculated about who will vanish next. Kim Jong-il took more than a nation in 1994. He took over from the great leader Kim Il-sung a system of personality cult and purging, in which a war-devastated nation had become a prison state and all citizens were both guard and captive. When Elder Kim suffered a heart attack and died that July, his son was met with instant distrust from the military veterans who had fought with his father in the war. Kim Jong-il, bouffant hairdoed and platform-shoed, cinema-obsessed, looked like no supreme commander. But he would give them something to remember. In blood. The arduous march started soon enough, though its origins went back years. Soviet assistance had dried up once the Cold War ended in 1991, along with the subsidized oil and grain that kept North Korea afloat. Floods in 1995 and 1996 wrecked what little crop remained, carrying away topsoil worn down over decades of unproductive cultivation. Estimates are that 240,000 starved and died of disease between 1994 and 1998. But other researchers estimate the number at 3.5 million, close to 15% of the population. Parents informed children that the bodies were sleeping. Markets retailed meat whose origin nobody doubted. Kim Jong-il's reaction made his priorities crystal clear. While citizens peeled bark from trees to create soup, he spent millions buying Hennessy cognac, keeping his collection of 20,000 films, and feeding his inner circle in luxury. He knew loyalty from the elite was more valuable than lives of the masses, but even that had to be repeatedly reinforced by terror. The Simhwa-jo campaign between 1996 and 2000 demonstrated how it worked. Formerly known as the Deepening Group for Consolidating Party Leadership, it was really a giant purge of everyone who could possibly ask why citizens were starving if the regime was in paradise. Estimates by intelligence put 10,000 to 25,000 officials under investigation, with thousands executed and tens of thousands more imprisoned in political penal colonies with their families. Even children were occasionally required to witness public executions at school during the day. The UN Commission of Inquiry spent years chronicling this system. Former guards testified to execution procedures, explaining how local security personnel would scout out appropriate sites with good visibility and crowd size. Sports stadiums, school playgrounds, riverbanks, marketplaces, any open area could be an execution site. The commission determined that authorities organized work units and schools to attend, with security agents observing the crowd's responses. The real executions themselves followed a routine. Security troops arrived hours ahead, blocking off areas and inspecting equipment, while plainclothesmen mixed with incoming crowds to watch reactions. The condemned prisoners were let out, often visibly tortured, occasionally having to be held up by an armrest in order to stand. Charges were read over crackling loudspeakers that made everyone hear every word. Then there were the rounds of rifle or automatic fire, occasionally to the chest, occasionally to the head. But merely watching was not sufficient for Kim Jong-il's regime. The audience had to join in, had to condemn the criminal with shouts and applaud the righteousness of the state. Security forces monitored who looked away, who felt sorry for the criminal, who did not express enough enthusiasm. Defectors have spoken of instances when people who did not express enough enthusiasm were investigated, or worse. It led to what scholars refer to as auto-surveillance. Everyone could inform on everyone. One defector reported to the UN Commission on witnessing an execution in 1997. The executed was So Kwan-hee, a director of agriculture, blamed for the famine caused by natural disaster and systemic failure.
So had worked 30 years for the regime, executing every policy without question, selling whatever agricultural theories were fashionable among leadership, irrespective of science. His devotion was complete until it ceased to matter. The accusations were preposterous: spying for South Korea, spoiling crops, intentionally starving the population. Everybody was aware that So was simply taking orders from on high, attempting to meet impossible targets with worn-out soil and no fertilizer. But that was exactly the message. If one so high up could be executed for doing his job, what hope did anyone else have? So's killing in Pyongyang was watched by hundreds of officials. The Fédération Internationale des Ligues des Droits de l'Homme chronicled how his death was a masterclass in regime survival. When the world goes awry, somebody has to pay with their life, and it won't be the dear leader. As happened occasionally during the 1990s, bodies were put on public display as a warning, with officials walking by, each knowing they were under observation to gauge their response. His family vanished the same day under North Korea's long tradition of punishing 3 generations for political offenses. The secret police were talking revolution. In November 2009, the regime had decreed a currency reform. 2 zeros would be lopped off the won. Citizens had only been able to convert 100,000 old won into new won, essentially wiping out anything above that sum, although reporting on it at the time had suggested the threshold had been raised subsequently amid popular pressure. The reform sought to eradicate the merchant class that had arisen out of the famine anarchy and reassert complete state control over the economy. The reform was disastrous. Markets shut down. Food vanished from stores as traders rejected the new useless currency. Prices skyrocketed within weeks. Even regime loyalists saw their lifetime savings vanish, years of prudent accumulation rendered useless overnight. There were rumors reaching Pyongyang of graffiti targeting Kim Jong-il himself, unthinkable months before. The state's network of surveillance reported that even children were echoing their parents' grumblings of having nothing to eat.
Kim Jong-il required a scapegoat in haste, a person senior enough to ring believable, a person whose demise would abate public fury and remind elites who actually held their destinies. The regime fixed the blame on Park Nam-gi, the head of planning and finance of the Workers' Party. Park had been responsible for the implementation of the currency reform, although everyone knew the instruction emanated from Kim Jong-il himself. At the age of 76, Park had served the regime his entire life, a revolutionist who had contributed to the building of the system that would now devour him. In January 2010, security agents came to his office. Witnesses said Park paled but did not struggle, maybe realizing that struggle was futile. He vanished into the state security machinery, where anyone could be produced a confession with enough time and torture. For weeks, nobody knew what had become of him. Then the summons arrived. March 12, 2010 began like any Friday in Pyongyang. But by midday, hasty messages were racing through government ministries, military headquarters, and party committees. Top officials had to go to Sosan Stadium at once, compulsory attendance, no excuses. The messages did not say why, but everybody grasped the syntax of state terror. They came in formal columns: military men in one sector, party men in another, security men in allocated areas. The stadium typically held soccer games and mass gymnastics shows, those synchronized displays of thousands in unison that North Korea once employed to show ultimate harmony. The performance today would be varied. Did they kill Park inside the stadium itself, forcing thousands to witness the bullets ripping through their erstwhile colleague? Some defectors claim to have witnessed it, recounting that guards pulled him to the center as officials stood immobile in their sections. Others aver the execution occurred elsewhere, that officials merely heard the news of his death, maybe witnessed his corpse on display as evidence. What all sources concur on,
There were thousands of officials gathered that day, and the regime utilized Pak's death to convey its message. They accused him of being a traitor who had ruined the economy for selfish motives. A spy, officials labeled him, an agent functioning to dismantle North Korea from inside. Nobody spoke of his decades-long service. His revolutionary background disappeared from records. The meticulous loyalty he'd maintained for 76 years was irrelevant as the accusations rang in the stadium. Each of the generals in that stadium knew they were witnessing a dress rehearsal for their own demise should they stand against the boy who would reign. The army had the capability to intervene. Another leader could be demanded, a coup staged during the week transfer. But Pak's assassination reminded them the surveillance state watched it all. Camps lined up families. Decades of service counted for nothing once trouble emerged. State-controlled media and propaganda quickly forgot Pak following the stadium incident. Dozens of relatives sent to the Gulag system, where the UN Commission of Inquiry estimates 80,000 to 120,000 political prisoners face conditions that appall even seasoned investigators. Purges were seen at the finance ministry among his former staff, some killed, others to camps, a few simply disappearing. The three-generation principle led to punishment carried across generations. Parents, children, grandchildren, all guilty by birth. This was unadulterated law in Kim Jong-il's career. There was an equal and opposite reaction to every action. The currency reform never came up again. The one just kept going. The markets were still needed in order to survive, and the state said nothing about the catastrophe as if it hadn't occurred. But the officials at Sosan Stadium that March day took with them a lesson. Failure was death, success was fleeting, and security lay in perfect, fervent obedience. International observers noted the execution's timing carefully. September 2009 had seen Kim Jong-un's formal introduction as successor, but skepticism lingered among generals about this untested 26-year-old. Pak's execution demonstrated the transition would proceed regardless of opinions. The terror system Kim Jong-il built protecting his son's ascension. The UN Commission of Inquiry would go on to note that public executions, most prevalent in the 1990s, decreased after 2000, then increased around 2013. Crimes varied from viewing South Korean videos to placing international calls, the Commission reported, though the actual offense never changed, appearing to be a threat to the regime. Former officials who had fled spoke of their return to the offices after Pak's execution in silence. Nobody talked about what they had seen. Nobody asked about the accusations. Everybody worked harder, came home later, and was more enthusiastic about the young general Kim Jong-un. They had learned the lesson Kim Jong-il meant. The dictator's most important victory was that his terror persisted even after he died. The regime that Kim Jong-il refined is a good model of the blend between rule and terror. Not terror as a means of rule, but terror as rule itself, in which the state exists mainly to show its capacity to murder, and citizens exist mainly to see that capacity. All institutions play this role. Schools take children to executions. Factories take workers to witness. The military makes its officers aware of their susceptibility. One defected colonel who left in 2011 told Human Rights Watch about the mental torture of the spectacles. He had witnessed dozens of executions during his tenure, seen comrades die for unknown crimes, applauded on command as his soul withered away. The worst was not the death itself, but the acting that came after. Feigning belief in the apparent falsehoods, thanking the party for saving them from traitors. He explained how officials cultivated a certain look for executions. Not sad enough, which indicated sympathy towards criminals. Not happy enough, which appeared to be bloodthirsty. A studied neutral face that exhibited proper revolutionary watchfulness without feeling. Men rehearsed this look in front of mirrors, he explained, honing their survival face. Another defector, a former prosecutor, described to the UN Commission how the judicial system was mere theater. Trials were a minute or two, verdicts were predetermined before arrest, and evidence was whatever the state dictated. He had sent hundreds to death knowing they were innocent, but his own family's survival rested on his efficiency. Every prosecutor knew, be merciful and you're the next defendant.
The Commission found that this system created multi-generational trauma. Children who witnessed executions often developed severe psychological problems, nightmares that persisted decades later. But seeking mental health treatment for execution-related trauma was itself suspicious, suggesting insufficient revolutionary spirit. So the pain went untreated, passed down through families like a genetic disease. Scholars wrote about what they termed the panopticon effect, named after philosopher Jeremy Bentham's idea of a prison in which prisoners have no idea if they are being observed, so must always believe that they are. Everyone believed their neighbors were reporting, their co-workers were informing, even children could rat them out for reward or out of fear. This complete surveillance induced paralysis. The generals who could have taken over recalled Sosan Stadium. The officials who could have changed the system recalled their fellow officials who had disappeared. The terror Kim Jong-il had created for 17 years survived him, safeguarding his son's inheritance more effectively than any military. The son would refine his father's fear through the inclusion of anti-aircraft guns during the executions. Kim Jong-un's early life showcased the system's success. Despite worldwide doubts about this new, untested leader, no visible internal conflict confronted him. The generals who had served his father welcomed him without hesitation, at least publicly. Those who could have held reservations recalled what became of those who became issues during transitions. The new ruler actually amplified the spectacle of executions. In 2013, he had his own uncle, Jen Song-taek, executed, broadcasting the arrest and trial to make sure that all of his officials witnessed it. In 2015, South Korean intelligence cited reports that Defense Minister Hyun Yong-chol was shot with anti-aircraft artillery at the Kanggon military training area in front of hundreds of officers, although these reports were never independently confirmed and subsequent reporting clarified some of the details. No one was beyond the law, rank was irrelevant, and the only safeguard was absolute obedience. The Committee for Human Rights in North Korea examined satellite images of places of execution and found arrangements consistent with the presence of witnesses and probable executions. These were not spontaneous homicides, but meticulously prepared productions, with sites selected for visibility. Some have been altered by modern technology. Digital monitoring completes the watching, and satellite imagery periodically allows the outside world to catch a glimpse of the preparations for executions. But the basic system Kim Jong-il perfected is the same: death as public education, forced witnessing as forced complicity, terror as governance. Global attempts at holding to account have consistently collapsed. The UN Commission urged referral of North Korea to the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity, specifically reference to the regular use of public executions and compulsory attendance. China and Russia vetoed any action by the Security Council under the cover of sovereignty trumping human rights. In the meantime, the killings keep going. Transitional justice specialists contend that records are still important, even without current accountability. The Transitional Justice Working Group has documented more than 300 sites where people were killed based on witness accounts, a record that one day might allow prosecution. They found patterns in the choice of victims, timing of killing,
and killing methods that might be evidence of systematic state policy and not arbitrariness. One of the women who fled after seeing her father's execution said that even if justice is never served, the world aware of what was done does justice to the dead. She can still recall each and every detail of the day: the hue of the sky, the noise of the guns, the odor of gunpowder, the look on her father's face. These are memories that prove the regime cannot wash away. The psychological effects reach far beyond the borders of North Korea. Defectors in South Korea continued to experience nightmares, inability to trust others, and anxiety attacks brought on by sudden noises. Some are unable to attend sporting events because stadiums resemble execution sites. Others are unable to watch violent movies, their bodies recalling involuntary complicity in state murder. There's a distinctive trauma profile described by therapists dealing with North Korean refugees. In contrast with war or disaster survivors who can frame their experience as abnormal, North Koreans have had to come to terms with the fact that their trauma was systematic, deliberate, and normalized within their culture. They were perpetrators and victims, compelled to applaud murder in order not to become victims themselves. This is Kim Jong-il's authentic legacy, not the nuclear bombs his scientists created or the dynasties he maintained, but a system of fear that functions with such perfection that it manages itself. Bureaucrats policing their own, citizens informing on each other. The generals who marched in Sosan Stadium on March 12, 2010, many of whom were later purged, reassigned, or retired. They've seen other friends perish, promoted over the bodies of the purged, and learned to master their survival masks. Some might secretly hope for change, but they recall Pak Nam-gi, recall So-kan-hee, recall all the others who believed their rank was what saved them. They realize rank couldn't have saved you back then. It won't save you now. When Kim Jong-il passed away on December 17, 2011, state news revealed millions crying in the streets, slapping their chests in despair, sobbing for their dear leader. Naturally, the crying and the sorrow were all staged, for refusing to do so meant death. North Korea still carries out executions in public and forces onlookers to witness them. The Transitional Justice Working Group still gets new evidence every week. They chart new locations, keep records of new victims. The machinery Kim Jong-il honed works with bureaucratic effectiveness, churning human beings into models, fear into obedience, witnesses into enablers. The stadium in Sosan remains in use. Soccer games, mass games, regime celebrations. The grass has been reseeded time and time again, the seats repainted, the sound system improved. Nothing commemorates what took place there in March 2010. No monument to Pak Nam-gi or the thousands of others who perished in North Korea's killing fields. But the generals remember. The officials remember. Anyone who was there remembers.